Hey, what's up? Chris Crone here. Today we're talking about rent-to-own homes, and I'm going to be teaching you how it works. Not only did I create my original fortune doing rent-to-owns, but check this out. This is the home I currently live in. It's a multi-million-dollar home, and guess how I bought it? I bought it as a rent-to-own. So what I'm talking about can help entry-level families try and get into a home, and it can also help multimillionaires do real estate while avoiding banks. Come on in, check it out.
One shot, now the future is yours. Go! I'm turning dreams into reality. Yeah, it's one shot, now the future is yours. Go!
You know, typically when it comes to real estate, most people think that you either go to a bank and buy a house or you rent. And those are pretty much your only two options. But I'm going to tell you right now, you certainly have more options than that. And that's what's called seller financing. That's when you work outside of a bank to structure a unique kind of deal. Let me show you my favorite one today. You see, it's not about owning. It's not about renting. This option is called rent to own. From Investopedia, rent to own is defined as an agreement in which you rent a home for a certain amount of time with the option to buy it before the lease expires. Rent to own agreements consist of two parts: a standard lease agreement and an option to buy. Let me actually share with you how I discovered rent to own, right? This whole lease option thing. The very first house I ever bought was the one that I was living in. You maybe heard me tell my story about it. What some of you don't know is that 12 months after I owned that house, I went back to the bank and the bank said, "Man, Chris, this house is worth over $150,000. You owe less than $110,000. We could give you a loan on the house." And I got a special kind of loan called a home equity line of credit. It was an $18,000 line of credit. That was enough money for me to pull it out and actually buy my next house. So one city over, I got a smoking hot deal on this other house. And originally I was just gonna rent this house out and I was gonna make a couple $100s a month. And I was excited. At the same time, I had a couple of buddies that had just gotten started in real estate a couple years earlier. I think they had like 7 or 8 homes, and they said, "Chris, you should do a rent to own on this house." And I said, "Why would I do that?" And they said, "Because you can help a family rent that home until they can buy it. You could actually provide a service to a family in the community, and you're actually gonna make more money if you do it." Let me share with you what I love about rent to own if it is done the right way. See, the truth is there's a ton of benefits for the person renting the home. There's also a lot of benefits for the person who owns the home. Let's first talk about the renter. See, when the renter gets in the house, the reality is they're going to pay a premium on rent. They're going to pay a little extra money, but they're doing that because a part of that rent actually is going to accumulate as a benefit. Just like when you buy a house and you own it from the bank, every time you make a payment, there's a part of that money that goes towards principal that you're going to get back when you pay that house down. Same thing happens with rent to own. Another core benefit to the renter is the flexibility. You know, typically someone is doing a lease option for 1 year, 2, 3, could be even up to 5 years. But I think 3 is pretty typical. And what that person is doing is basically buying time. They're getting some flexibility. They can treat that home like it's their own, but guess what? They don't actually have to buy it yet. But that flexibility to the renter comes at a price. They're gonna have to give what's called an option payment. Some might look at it kind of like a down payment. It's an amount of money, 1, 2, 3, or 4, or 5% of the value of a house. Typically on entry-level single family, you're talking about $3,000, $5,000, $10,000 that you're going to give down to be able to have the right to buy that home in the future. In a recent article by Mortgage Reports, they shared some of the top reasons why people actually love rent-to-owns. Number 1, you get to lock in the house that you want to buy, but you technically don't even have to buy it yet. Number 2, it gives you time to raise your credit score. Sometimes people are doing a rent to own because their credit isn't where it needs to be. But I've also found that often people do a rent to own when they need flexibility. They don't know what awaits their future over the next year or two, or maybe they're gonna have a career move. So they'd like to know that they could buy the house, but they'd actually like to be able to back out without necessarily being 100% tied to that house. Remember, it's an option to buy. It's not you have to buy. And then finally, you have time to save up for a down payment when you go to the bank. So really what a rent to own to do is giving flexibility, and it's giving time in advance to someone that is technically not doing this, working with the bank to get involved. Perhaps the biggest benefit for someone looking at doing a rent to own, there's no bank involved. Do you know how many people don't own real estate because banks have really strict qualification processes?
There's something wrong. The bank won't give someone their money.
I want to see that you've been at your job for this amount of time, and I want to see that you've got this amount of money in savings, and I want to see that you've spent your money this way, and I'm looking at this thing called a debt to income ratio. It gets complicated. You know, the moment you do this thing called a rent to own and the bank's out of it, things become really simple. Basically, here's the way this shakes down. Here's Bob, and this is Marcy. And Bob says to Marcy, I've got a house, but I don't want to rent it to you. I'm going to do a rent to own. And Marcy says, Bob, why won't you just rent the house to me? And Bob says, well, Marcy, someday, would you like to own that house? Marcy says, I've been trying to own a house for a long time, but I've been scared. I've talked to banks and I've been rejected before. And Bob says, check out how simple this is. Basically, I'm going to charge you a little bit of a higher rent, and sometime in the next 3 years, you're going to get yourself in a position to buy this house. And along the way, Bob says, I'm going to take some of that rent money and I'm going to credit it and I'm going to take it off the price of the house so you're not just throwing your money away like you have been renting. How cool does that sound? And Marcy's like, oh my gosh, Bob, are you single? Can I marry you? That's absolutely amazing. Let's do this deal. Bob says, but wait, you need to give me some money that says that you're really committed. If I'm giving you all that flexibility and that advance on home ownership, you get to treat the house like it's yours. And Marcy's like, well, what do I need to do to show you I'm committed? And Bob says, well, I don't just want you to give me like first and last month's rent like you typically do when you rent something. I need you to give me a little bit more money to show me you're committed and serious. Like how much, Bob? Well, like $3,000 or $5,000 or $7,000. Marcy says, well, which amount is it? Just shoot straight with me. And Bob's like, well, actually, that's where I'm cool. I give you flexibility. If you give me a little bit more money, I'll drop your payment a little bit. But if you give me less money, I'll raise your price a little bit higher. Marcy's like, this is amazing. Let's make this happen. And they make a deal. Now, I want to make sure that you actually understand how a lease option can be really financially powerful. I got to the point where I was buying a home every single month, and within a month I was getting it leased out, and I was collecting on average $5,000 up front, and I was making about $500 a month of positive cash flow. Now, you can imagine if I buy 12 homes in a year, that means that I'm collecting $5,000 12 times. That's $60,000. You can also do the math and say, Chris, wait a second. If you're making $500 a month of profit every month per house and you have 12 of them, that's also $6,000 a month of residual income. That's 72 grand a year. That's more than the average American makes. In 1 year of real estate, I literally figured out how to not have a job, which is why after I had done about 25 deals, I said goodbye to working for the man. And I basically said, with real estate, I can work for myself. I can help other people. I found a way for it to be really profitable to me, and I found a way to create a huge benefit for the families that are renting my homes. Now, don't get me wrong, I like that $5 grand up front, and I also really like the $500 a month every single month that I'm going to get until I sell that house. But now imagine when you do sell that house that you make, let's call it $50,000 more dollars. Well, the $5 grand tastes good. The $500 each month also tastes good. But that $50,000 when you sell that house, that's the incentive that I have to actually have the person in that home buying it from me because I'm going to get a really big payday. And you know what I can do with $50,000? I can go buy a bunch more real estate. And now it becomes this snowball. It's like standing at the top of a snowy mountain and grabbing some wet snow, forming a little ball, and I push it down the steep hill and it starts building momentum. That's why last year I bought hundreds of homes because my wealth is now just continuing to spin into something bigger and bigger and bigger. Here's my advice for you. If you really want to understand like this game of lease options like I'm talking about, you're going to want to master it. And I wrote the ultimate handbook for it. In fact, my first book I wrote, The Straight Path to Real Estate Wealth, I'm giving it to you for free. If you click the link below, within 2 or 3 hours, you could have that book read and fully understand exactly how I made my first several millions of dollars, and you could copycat me and do the exact same thing. Get that knowledge because it's powerful. power. And if you implement it, even more so. As cool as rent-to-own sounds, I think you also should be aware that some people take it to a predatory level. That's like someone taking advantage of somebody else. Let me tell you how they would do it. They would say, hey, I own this house, and instead of renting it, I'm gonna do a rent to own. I'm gonna jack up the price. I'm gonna collect a big fat down payment. And then I'm going to hope that the person can't even move forward on buying the house, because I wanna kick them out and I wanna charge someone else a big fat down payment and more steep rent. And that's my business plan. And you know what? I have issues with that, because the reality is nothing is sustainable unless it creates value for everybody. And so when I wrote my book, The Straight Path to Real Estate Wealth, it's all about me teaching you how to do the lease option different. In fact, I even give it a different name. I call it compassionate financing. Because when I put someone in a home, I'm actually going out of my way to help that person eventually buy that home. When they do, they're gonna get it at a discount. They'll have taken care of the house. I wouldn't have had to fix it up. I don't have to pay a property manager. I'm gonna make more cash flow. It's really a mutual win-win across the board. Now, if you like the information you're learning in today's video, here's the good news. My entire blueprint of how I do lease options and make a lot of money with them, I'm giving you entirely for free. In the link below, you literally can get a copy of my book, and I will walk you through how I made my first $1.6 million. But I also want you to understand that you can use a lease option to hurt people. So I want you to make a promise right now to me, yourself, that you're gonna wield this as a wealth building strategy to help people. And I'm gonna share with you why. I can show you how to do a lease option with no money out of your own pocket to buy real estate literally right now. I can also show you deals that take a few $1,000s and you can turn that into piles of money. I can also show you how to do lease options with more traditional financing. The reality is, it's the kind of real estate that you can do and make work for any person in any financial situation. If you're watching this video, and especially if you're young and you're thinking, Chris, I want to get into real estate, but I either lack the money or I myself don't even want to go to a bank, a lease option can be the perfect strategy to help you make that money in real estate. Which is why I created a really short 4-video series that walks you mathematically step by step exactly what lease options are, exactly how I perform them, how I find the families to put in the homes, how much money I make. In fact, in this video series, I'm going to show you literally how I make twice as much money on a lease option than I do just renting a home, while providing huge financial benefits to the family occupying the home. Check out the video right now. I don't even know whose cat that is.
I was going to say, is that your cat?
Escape.
I don't even know whose cat that is.
Just chilling.
Okay.